Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious, what's the most creepy moment you have from when you were a kid? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I've lived in a small mountain town in Colorado for 17 years. When my friends and I got our licenses, we'd drive around in the mountains when we got bored. This one area we went to frequently is beautiful, but it's known to be pretty sketchy. People shoot guns in the wrong areas, there's a lot of drug use when people party, and bodies have been occasionally found back there. We were driving around one night when we suddenly passed a man walking on the road. It was weird because we hadn't seen him in the headlights initially. It was more like he appeared out of nowhere as we were passing him. I thought he was walking a little weird as I looked back at him, so I asked my friend to stop. Maybe he was hurt or something. He paused for like 10 seconds when we stopped, and then he started running at the vehicle. Not a, oh shit, let me catch up to them real quick, jog with a wave or anything like that. A full-blown sprint, like he had a personal vendetta against us. It freaked us out, and my friend hit the gas again. We did call the police just to make sure we didn't leave him in danger, but didn't hear anything else about it. And this is more lighthearted, but when the game Until Dawn first came out, I was freshly living alone in my own place for the first time at 22. I was petrified of the dark for weeks after watching a playthrough. I had to start sleeping with a light on because I was having nightmares, and I was genuinely so terrified of the monsters in the game potentially busting in through my sliding door windows. I couldn't even bring myself to move around in my bed to adjust and get comfortable. I knew it was ridiculous, but just couldn't shake that fear for weeks. 10-year-old me. New family had recently moved in and had set up a shrine with a face on a tree and candles in the backyard. Irrelevant other than for context of creepiness. We became friends with the girl in the family who began telling us that her house was haunted. We were intrigued, as any good 10-year-old would be, but given their weirdness, we thought nothing of it. One day, playing in the yard with her, a disheveled-looking man comes running out the front door, followed by the family. He proceeded to run full speed into the woods with the dad yelling at him. Come to find out, dude had been living in their attic and had been keeping it locked from the inside. The dad finally pried it open, chase ensuing. To this day, I check under, inside, above, behind, and outside of every house I've ever lived in and regularly clear corners when I get home. Creepy AF. Went to my friend's granddad's when we were like 12. He had paintings of huge cocks and chains and stuff all over the walls. Needed to go, and he tried to lock me in. I was crying so much, and he was saying everything was fine until Fagnus Twatfield started being an arsehole. My friend, who was definitely in hindsight being abused, begged him to let me go. He relented and even got me a black cab home with him in it. As I typed this, probably to find out where I lived. The kicker? My mom said I deserved it. That's the abridged version. I'd like to hear more. My cousin, who was 15 at the time, I was 6, was washing himself. I asked if he was hurt because there was a lot of blood. He just flicked water at me and told me to get him soap. I didn't even ask him why he was in my parents' house. Much later, I learned he had beat up his stepdad so badly stepdad suffered a stroke and couldn't walk. The blood wasn't my cousin's. He had ran to my parents' house to hide. He didn't get in trouble, and the only person who was angry at him was his own mom. The reason he beat up the guy was because he walked in on the stepdad naked and forcing himself on his younger sisters. I think this is an instance when you can say that old quote that not all heroes wear capes. I hope the family recovered from this trauma and that they're doing better. When I was around 3, I fell into a 44-gallon drum filled with water that me and my little friend were looking into. I remember it being a beautiful sunny day and how clear the water looked. Apparently my friend somehow pulled me out after I fell in, but honestly, I don't know how another 3-year-old could do it. I don't remember anything else about it. I'm not sure where Mom was and Dad was at work. For years I had nightmares about rust-colored clouds ballooning up, dark, rusty clouds. It took me 30 years before it clicked it was the rust being stirred up by me trying to get out of that drum. I don't remember exactly how young I was at the time, but I was really young. At the time, my parents both worked full-time, and my very old grandmother lived with us and took care of me during the day. I was an only child at that time. We lived in flats. Throughout the day, grandmother would take long baths, and I'd be seated in front of the TV till she got out and played with me. This one time, she took much longer than usual. At some point, after calling out to her and getting no response, I went to the bathroom door and knocked. When she didn't come out, I went in. She was submerged to her chin, her body was twisted, her face was so contorted it looked like she was in agony. Her lips were completely skewed to one side of her face, and her eyes were, just blank. I don't remember what happened next, but whenever my parents recounted the story, they say I ran out screaming bloody murder out of the flat. Neighbors heard me, called an ambulance, and my parents. She had had a stroke and would be bedridden for the rest of her life. She died a year or so later, I think. It's weird. I can't really remember what she looked like anymore, but her face that time stuck with me. Parents told me I didn't speak for weeks afterwards. I remember when I was about 12 onward, I'd randomly wake up in the middle of the night to my abusive mother standing in the doorway. She had this look she would give when she was particularly messed up between the alcohol and the opioids, and sleeping pills she'd mixed. It was absolutely satanic. On multiple occasions, I would wake up to her just staring at me, but way longer than just to check on me. She would just stand there for what seemed like forever, and if I even slightly moved, she'd scream at me for being awake and punish me. One day, my dad called me out to the living room, and my mother is there looking pretty concerned, telling him he was taking things too far. He tells me, "Your mom says you've been laying in bed crying at night because you're afraid someone's going to come into your room and kill you? What's that about?" I was totally confused and just blew it off as one of my mom's drunk high delusions and told him I absolutely didn't. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that whenever my mother said something about someone else, she was projecting. Like, she told me for years that she suspected that my dad was cheating on her. She was actually cheating on him. Bitch was probably getting effed up out of her mind and thinking about killing me in my own bed. No, we don't talk anymore, and I've informed her I will use whatever force necessary to remove her from my property if she ever gets in her head to show up. I was nearly kidnapped by someone who drove up to my house and tried to entice me to come up to him at his car when I was about 5 or 6. I was playing in the yard by myself. Said he wanted to show him on a map where a certain street was. Had his car door open and everything. Thank God I went inside to get my mom to help him because he was gone when she and I came back. My brother was murdered by his girlfriend when they were both drunk and high. I was merely 11. My brother had been 17 going on 18. I found him, beaten to death by her. The creepiest moment of my life will always be seeing him like that. He was just coated in blood, cold, looked afraid. The creepiest part was hearing his last wheeze of breath. It's obviously stuck with me. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. I'm sorry. When I was in elementary school, probably 8 or 9, we were all on the playground, probably like 100 kids throughout all the outdoor areas of the playground, teachers, etc., basketball court, jungle gym, random field areas, etc., middle of the day at recess, bright and sunny, and not a cloud in the sky. I was looking across the playground, and all of a sudden, there was one flash where everyone was running inside in unison, and then almost immediately, another flash where everybody was effing gone. Not a single other soul in the playground, and the sky was suddenly very dark and cloudy and stormy. At the second flash, there was an extremely loud crack of thunder that rumbled and echoed for what seemed like minutes. It was clearly later in the day, and I was so effing confused. I made my way back to the classroom, and it was probably 5 minutes before the final dismissal bell rang. The teacher was asking me where I'd been, and I got in trouble. I'm guessing I fell asleep or something, but holy shit, man. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. Okay, so there's a few bits of context. Growing up, I looked older than I was, but it doesn't change anything really. I was around 10, but I looked about 11 or 12. I usually walked an old lady's dog at the time, small pug around the block, and she was super nice and paid me £1 for it. I decided to go to my local shop, which was only a 5-minute walk from my house. Some guy came in while I was looking at the sweets and started talking to me. It was a long time ago. I can't remember the conversation, but I remember parts of the more creepy bits. He offered to buy me sweets and a few fizzy drinks, and being the gluttonous 10-year-old I was, I accepted. Paid around £20 on sweets alone. He somehow knew I had a much younger sister and asked if she liked bonbons. I replied that I didn't know, she probably couldn't eat them yet. And then, when we got the drinks, he asked, "What school do you go to?" Keep in mind I'm 10, I'm alone at the shop, and I didn't know this guy. I just pretended I didn't know, but then he said my school. "You go to school, right?" My heart dropped for a second again, since this man before in my life. I stupidly probably put other kids in danger if this man had bad intentions. I said I went to school down the hill from my actual school. He then asked where I lived, and then it sort of clicked for me. If my parents knew who this man was, and he lived around the area, he'd probably know where I stayed, so why did he ask? I replied next to the train station, opposite, and again he replied with another answer that scared me. "I've seen you walking from my street." As a 10-year-old, I was terrified, not only from the fact, 1, why would he spend £20 on sweets alone? Altogether, the drinks, sweets, crisps came to almost £30, but why is he asking questions to me? Someone he didn't know, expecting an answer he knew. I nervously laughed, and once he paid, he asked if I wanted him to walk me home since it was late. It was midsummer, between 7 and 9 p.m., so still light enough I could see. I declined and told him my dad was waiting for me. I walked down a certain street that turns to the transition, but also turns to my actual street. Also the same street friends and other people who knew me lived, so I felt more safe. He did, however, walk me to the start of the street, but before the turn I said my dad was at the end waiting for me in his car. I ran home, never talked about it to my mom. She did question me about where I had gotten the stuff from. I lied and said I found money. Never saw him again, like ever, so I assumed he didn't even live near me. Might not be super creepy, but still creepy enough to myself to wonder what the F he was doing. My dad and I, probably 8 at the time, too big for a booster seat, too small for the front seat, so I was still in the back, were driving home from something. It was a 2-lane each way divided highway, and there were a lot of tractor trailers. My dad went to pass one, but we ended up getting boxed in. And it wasn't just a slow truck slowly passing another truck thing, it went on long enough that it was clearly on purpose. So here we are, one truck purposely going slow in front of us, one blocking the side of us. And our open side was, again, solid rock, as they tried to push us off the road. I remember my dad being freaked out and trying to get the license plates of the trucks to give to the police, who he couldn't call at the moment because we were in a cell phone dead zone. I looked up from the book I was reading and made eye contact with one of the drivers. He had a big white beard and looked straight at me with a sinister smile that, had I not already stopped believing in Santa Claus, would have made me scared of Christmas. Eventually, we got to a town and were able to get into a parking lot where my dad called the police. We waited 10 minutes or so to get distance from the trucks. Then he got back on the road and thankfully didn't cross them again. Some people say words like road rage, but sometimes it just comes down to just simple pettiness. Just be respectful of people. No one has your worst interest in mind because they're trying to get from point A to point B, just like you. Someone rang once as I was getting out of the shower, and so I answered the phone in a towel and a shower cap. The caller started saying disgusting things to me. I froze until he said he could see me, and I realized he couldn't see me because then he'd know how hilarious I looked, so I told him to F off and hung up. But man, I was frozen in fear for a while there. I think I was 11. I used to swim in the river in our town with my father. Everyone was doing it back then. I was about 7 years old and we went to our swimming tour. When we got out, I touched something creepy with my foot and asked my dad to check. He pulled out a dead, bloated guy. I had nightmares for years. Whoa. I was walking through the woods with a couple of friends, and we came across a clearly abandoned car. I have no clue how it even got there. It was deep in the woods. We were all kind of creeped out, but I decided to go in for a closer look. Some of the windows were smashed, some were covered in filth and grime. I peeped through a smashed window and saw what was distinctly a human leg. I screamed and ran. We all ran and never went back. I never told anyone, but I still think about it all the time. Kind of a stand by me moment right there. Sometimes cars end up in really weird places, so hope you're okay. Walking with my grandmother at night along a gravel road close to where she lives out in the country. We were heading home to my grandparents' house. 6-year-old me turns to my grandmother and asks who the lady who ran across the road behind us was. She turns around, sees nobody, and asks me to describe her. Down to a T, I describe a cruel woman who used to live not far away who was now 10 years dead. I didn't live there, so I didn't think much about it, but according to my grandfather, my description of the lady I had seen was so on point that my grandmother never walked alone there after dark. That was 29 years ago, and she still refuses to walk that road alone at night. I went with my mom, who was a psychiatric nurse, to her job at a state-run psychiatric facility to grab her check. I saw a man run down the stairs screaming and flailing his arms, and about 3 or 4 guys grab him and put him on a gurney for mechanical and chemical restraints. I must have been around 9 or 10. It was scary at the time, but then I ended up becoming an LCSW and helped other residential programs for adolescents with behaviors similar to this. When I was about 14 years old, I was home alone with my parents who were out visiting some friends. Around 9:30 at night, I suddenly hear some voices downstairs. I knew all the doors were locked and no one besides my parents could get in, so I was afraid the house was broken into, so I start to listen. It sounds like at least a dozen people having some sort of dinner party, though I can't make out exactly what they're saying. I make it halfway down the stairs and I still hear the voices all talking. Finally, I yell out, "Hello," and all the voices instantly stop, and I didn't hear anything again. Craziest thing I've ever experienced. When I was a kid, I was misdiagnosed with cerebral palsy, and my parents took me to the psychic, some weird middle-aged guy in a shabby flat who promised to help my condition. I remember him touching my neck and pulling my ears, and it really hurt. I was scared and wanted to go home. I don't remember how it ended, but apparently, after just 2 or 3 seances, my dad went to this guy's house and seriously beat him up. I'd legitimately blacked it out because it was so traumatic, but as an adult, a beloved auntie brought it up for some unfathomable reason, and ever since, I can't forget it. When I was small, like still in diaper small, my working mother had to hire out babysitting for me while she was at work to earn a living. Sometimes my grandmother would pick me up from said babysitters and take me home where we all 3 lived. This day, my grandmother noticed that I was sullen and more taciturn than usual. I now know I was autistic, but rural Indiana in the 70s, no one knew what autism was. She reached across the bench seat in the car to try and touch me and I recoiled. When she got me home, she checked me up and found bruising all up under my diaper. Like serious bruising, sexual assault bruising. She took me to the same hospital where I was born, and I guess my mom met us there. I don't remember any of the exam or the abuse itself. I just remember the babysitter's boyfriend as the culprit. It was later discovered that he was AWOL from the army. This was after Vietnam, and eventually disappeared from the area altogether. I remember taking college classes and learning that in our lifetimes, 20% of women will have experienced at least one sexual assault. I wondered why the statistic bothered me so damn much. Now I know. It's because I didn't make it out of diapers before mine. The park down the street, my mom took us to play and walk the dogs. It was large, with some very isolated areas that became the woods once you took certain paths. We lived in a bad neighborhood, but I didn't really understand that. Lots of creepy shit went down there, but we never stopped going and generally went almost daily. Some examples. A certain isolated section was a hangout for paint sniffers. They would lay in tall grass and get high so you couldn't see them, unless you were basically on top of them. They were sketchy, disheveled, high as F, and had metallic paint on their hands and faces. Hearing spray paint cans rattle still gives me chills. There was what looked like a kid's stick fort, but was clearly where a homeless person was living. Obviously, homeless people aren't inherently creepy, but my mom let us play in it among their things. That was irresponsible, potentially dangerous and rude. We never saw the person or people living there somehow, but I wonder if they saw us. We came across several sort of traps on the paths to the fort though. Metal wires strung across the path fastened to branches at neck height, sharp sticks stuck up in the ground, stuff like that. This was in the Midwest, and there was a lake right there too. So when it iced over during the winter, we walked on it, but my mom also let us walk on it when it started to thaw. I remember walking on it, seeing the water bubble and move underneath, and feeling how soft the thawing ice felt. I was nervous, but I didn't fully know better or how incredibly dangerous this was. One year, there was a serial killer operating in the area, and the secluded woodsy place was where he was burning and dumping the bodies of his victims. We still went there all the time. Looking back, I low-key wonder if my mom was trying to kill us. Like, not really, but kind of. She was in a terribly abusive relationship, and when I think about her life, then she must have been really unhappy. Aside from what I'm describing here, she was a great mom who was incredibly loving and responsible, but this all makes me absolutely cringe and get goosebumps when I think back on it.